It is a bleak winter morning in 1972. A lone car winds its way along the Glenshane Pass toward Derry, Northern Ireland. The hills are draped in cold mist, and a wet wind in the hedges buffets the roadside bushes. Over the mountain looms a dark cloud, heavy with grief. Along the route, black flags of mourning flutter, flags like black frost lining the road in silent tribute. The air itself feels frozen in sorrow, as if the land were holding its breath. This is no ordinary, everyday journey. It is a funeral procession. 13 coffins await in Derry, each holding a life cut short. It is in this harrowing atmosphere that the poet Seamus Heaney takes the road to Derry, moving towards the heart of a national tragedy. This dramatic scene is the opening of Heaney's poem, The Road to Derry. It's a poem that plunges us as readers directly into a world of conflict and mourning. The listener is immediately immersed in both the physical but also the emotional landscape of Northern Ireland in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday. And that is the infamous day, January the 30th, 1972, when British paratroopers shot dead civil rights protesters in Derry. Heaney's journey to Derry on the day of the victims' funerals becomes the backbone of the poem's narrative. In this particular episode of Study Sessions, we're going to explore how The Road to Derry depicts conflict on multiple levels: the personal, the political, the historical, and the emotional, through Heaney's powerful language, imagery, and all the while making some references to context as well. We're analysing how the poem's vivid descriptions and various poetic devices convey the trauma of the event, the poet's sense of inner turmoil, and a fragile hope for justice amidst despair. Now, to understand the conflict portrayed in The Road to Derry, we must first grasp its context. And you will have had, of course, this context in lesson, but it definitely bears repeating. In early 1972, the conflict in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles, was really at its peak. Civil rights marches by the Catholic and nationalist community demanding equal rights were often met with violence. On Bloody Sunday, a peaceful march in Derry ended in tragedy when British Army paratroopers opened fire on unarmed civilians, killing 13 people on the spot, and a 14th died later, about 4 months later, of wounds. The massacre sent shockwaves through Ireland and indeed throughout the world. Heaney himself, who was living in Belfast at the time, was deeply affected. Just like many others, he drove from Belfast to Derry to attend the victims' funerals in the days that followed. Heaney's drive to the heartbroken city of Derry on the day of those funerals inspired this poem, which he wrote in the immediate aftermath. Now, interestingly, the poem The Road to Derry was initially composed at the request of the folk singer Luke Kelly, who's in the very famous folk group The Dubliners, who'd actually asked Heaney to write lyrics about the journey with the intention of setting it to music. So in essence then, Heaney has produced what we might call a ballad, a poem that has the narrative drive of a song meant to commemorate the fallen. Now, Kelly never added or never got round to adding the music, and the poem actually remained unpublished until 1997, when it appeared for Bloody Sunday's 25th anniversary. So for nearly 2 decades after 1972, Heaney, who was notably cautious about directly kind of political poetry, actually produced and eventually published this piece designed to stand as a raw, immediate response in some ways to a political atrocity. It offers a valuable glimpse into how a poet depicts conflict while balancing personal emotions with that notion of historical witness, bearing witness to what is going on around oneself. Now, if we turn to the imagery, particularly the imagery of landscape, but also political conflict, it's worth paying attention to this. In this particular poem, of all of the poems you look at, because it's very, very rich with vivid imagery that portrays the conflict's impact on the land and people. In the opening lines, the weather and the landscape mirror the emotional climate of Northern Ireland after the massacre. We're told of a, quote, wet wind in the hedges and a, quote, dark cloud on the mountain. And it creates, through those word choices and through that imagery, a very somber, foreboding mood. The land itself seems to mourn. Along the road, flags like black frost are seen mourning the 13 men were dead. The simile is very striking. Think about that, flags like black frost. That black frost suggests a deadly coldness that has settled over everything. Just as frost blights living things, the black flags, those traditional symbols of mourning, blanket the countryside with the chill of death. It's through this imagery that Heaney produces a tone of collective grief, but also hints at political conflict. Black flags likely refer to the nationalist community's mourning for their martyrs, silently testifying to both the tragedy but also that sense of anger that was in the air. As the poem continues, Heaney invokes the geography of Northern Ireland to deepen the sense of historical and political conflict. He personifies local rivers to convey national sorrow. The Roe wept at Dungiven, and the Foyle cried out to heaven. Now, the Roe and the Foyle are rivers along the route to Derry, and so by making them weep and cry, Heaney implies that nature itself is participating in the grieving. This personification elevates the tragedy to a sort of cosmic scale. Even the rivers are shedding tears for the fallen. It also taps into Irish poetic tradition, where the land often reflects human suffering, suggesting that the trauma of Bloody Sunday is shared by all living things in that landscape. Heaney then explicitly links the political conflict of the present to past violence. Bentollett's old wound opened, and again the bogside bled. The line is packed with historical references. Bentollett refers to the Bentollett Bridge incident of 1969, an earlier flashpoint during a civil rights march where protesters were ambushed and beaten. It is referred to as a wound in the collective memory of the community. With that wound being opened again, the poem is suggesting that Bloody Sunday re-injured old scars. History is bleeding anew. The Bogside, the Derry neighbourhood where Bloody Sunday took place, bled again once more, emphasising the cyclical nature of the violence that has returned to the very same community. These images of wounds and bleeding cast the conflict in bodily, very physical terms. The city and its people are hurt and hemorrhaging, are bleeding. Such language underscores the cyclical nature of political conflict in Northern Ireland. Past injustices go unhealed and then erupt again in the present. Notably, Heaney here uses no explicit political slogans or partisan rhetoric in these lines. Instead, he relies on imagery. Frost, rivers, wounds, blood, to convey the human cost of the conflict. The effect then is of a powerful lament that transcends or moves beyond a single event and speaks to the larger tragedy of violence. It's through these landscape and nature images that the Road to Derry portrays a people and land under siege by historical forces, establishing the political and historical conflict as an inescapable, almost elemental presence in their lives. Amidst all the national mourning, though, Heaney also writes himself into the poem, conveying his personal emotional conflict as he arrives in Derry. After depicting the landscape's grief, the perspective shifts to the first person. By Shipquay Gate I shivered, and by the lone moor I inquired where I might find the coffins where the 13 men lay dead. Now, these are actual locations in Derry, again grounding the poem in real lived experience. We can easily, as readers, imagine Heaney, this outsider from Belfast, shivering both from the cold of winter, but also from emotional shock as he passes through Derry's old walled city gate. He asks directions to find the coffins of the victims. It's a moment that humanizes the poem. It's no longer just nature and cities that are weeping, it's the poet personally stepping into the scene of conflict and of grief. Heaney then delivers one of the poem's most memorable lines. It lays bare his feelings of inner turmoil, inner conflict. My heart besieged by anger, my mind a gap of danger. In this very compact phrase, he uses the language of siege warfare to describe his heart. His heart is besieged, it's surrounded, assaulted by anger. It's a metaphor that powerfully conveys the personal conflict raging within him. Overwhelming anger threatens to take over, just as an enemy army besieges a fortress. Meanwhile, his mind is this gap of danger, suggesting a blank or a breach filled with peril. Think of anger and danger, the way they sound very close, that linking the two words, reinforcing how anger is tied to something perilous. Heaney is alerting us to the emotional conflict he feels, that very volatile mix of grief and outrage and the frightening temptations of violent thoughts. In the aftermath of Bloody Sunday, many people felt anger tip towards a desire for revenge. Heaney's self-description, besieged by anger, acknowledges the way that rage can consume us. The gap of danger hints at the precariousness of his reason, his ability to think things through, a recognition that anger can lead us down a very dangerous and violent path. This introspective moment, thinking about his own feelings, shows Heaney's awareness of the moral conflict faced by those in his community. How to respond to injustice without losing yourself to hatred. His next lines continue in first person. I walked among their old haunts, the home ground where they bled. Here, Heaney is walking through the bogside, the familiar neighbourhood or home ground of the victims, now turned into a site of bloodshed. Old haunts carries ghostly resonances, places haunted by the spirits of the dead. This language conveys the personal grief of moving through a community that has been irrevocably changed. It's as if he's walking with the ghosts of the fallen, sharing in the mourner's sorrow. That phrase, home ground where they bled, also subtly implies a conflict of belonging. These men were killed on their own soil, in their own streets, highlighting the injustice and the violation implicit within the violence. For Heaney, a poet deeply rooted in the idea of home and of land, witnessing blood on home ground strikes at the heart of personal and communal identity. The conflict here is not just between two sides with guns, it is between a community sense of home and this intrusion of violence. Throughout these personal reflections, the tone is hushed, respectful, anguished. Heaney doesn't describe the violence itself. There are no gunshots, there's no soldiers, but the presence of conflict is felt in the anger and the fear and the sadness that radiates from his words. By focusing on his internal state and the aftermath of the massacre, Heaney emphasizes the emotional toll of conflict rather than the spectacle, how the conflict would have looked. It's an approach that invites us to consider not just what happened in a historical sense, but how it felt to those who lived through it. We can hear Heaney's inner voice grappling with grief and fury, making the political violence, the killing of the protesters, profoundly personal. Heaney's use of language and form in The Road to Derry reinforces the theme of conflict and introduces a glimmer of hope for justice. The poem is written in a ballad-like form, with short lines and a rather rhythmic song-like quality. It even carries a refrain of sorts. That phrase, 13 men lay dead, is repeated a couple of times. It's a repetition that tolls like a bell throughout the poem, a reminder of the human cost at the centre of the conflict. By echoing the phrase, Heaney ensures that readers can't forget the tragedy. It is the reason for the journey, the source of the anger, the heart of the poem. The refrain is a constant conflict between memory and forgetting. It refuses to let the dead be forgotten, despite any political attempts to cover up or to move on. Heaney's diction or word choice is mostly simple. It's stark. It suits the somber subject. Within the plain-spoken style, Heaney weaves in some very potent figurative language, though, metaphors and similes. It obviously deepens the meaning and the feel of the poem. A really crucial metaphor comes in the poem's final image, which shifts the tone from despair toward cautious optimism. Heaney writes, quote, "And in the dirt lay justice like an acorn in the winter, till its oak would sprout in Derry, where 13 men lay dead." This concluding image is rich with implication. Justice is compared to an acorn buried in winter soil, something small, buried, and for now, seemingly lifeless. It suggests that justice for the victims is currently dormant. It's hidden in the dirt amid the immediate aftermath. Winter, of course, is a time when growth stops and the world seems dead. By using this seasonal metaphor, Heaney acknowledges the bleak reality. In 1972, there was no justice. The official inquiry at the time quickly whitewashed the incident. They kind of covered it up, really, and truth for decades was suppressed. Justice lay like a seed under frozen ground. And yet the very presence of the acorn implies future growth. An acorn in winter is not gone forever, it's waiting for spring. Heaney extends this metaphor by imagining that acorn growing into an oak tree in Derry someday. The oak is traditionally a symbol of strength and endurance. Here, it symbolises the eventual emergence of truth and justice out of that dark event of Bloody Sunday. There's also a poignant cultural resonance in this image. Derry's name in Irish actually means oak grove. By mentioning an oak sprouting in Derry, Heaney cleverly takes and ties the idea of justice to the very identity of the city itself. It's as if he's saying that justice will, we hope, take root in the community, growing tall and strong right where the blood of the 13 men was shed. It's a very hopeful note, indicating that the story's not over, that the conflict between truth and lies, justice and injustice, will eventually be resolved in favour of truth, even if it takes time. In hindsight, from the perspective of today, Heaney's hopeful image proved somewhat prescient. It did indeed take decades, but eventually the truth of Bloody Sunday did come to light. In 2010, after nearly 40 years, a new inquiry, known as the Saville Report, definitively cleared the victims, those who died, of wrongdoing, and the British government issued an apology. This acorn of justice finally sprouted into the oak, we might say, of acknowledgement. Knowing this outcome adds an extra layer, I think, of meaning when we, as students today, read the poem. The oak that would sprout in Derry is not just a metaphorical wish, but something that actually happened in the pursuit of justice. It doesn't lessen the tragedy, but what it does is shows us the enduring relevance of Heaney's theme, the long struggle for justice in the face of conflict. So in the end then, the road to Derry depicts conflicts not as some abstract idea, but as a lived reality that scars landscapes and the human heart. Heaney's journey along that road, from the chilling wind on the mountain to the vision of an oak of justice, invites us as readers to reflect on the cost of conflict and the value of perseverance. The poem's opening draws us into that dark moment in history, and it helps us understand all of those different layers of conflict at play. As we finish this episode, we carry with us Heaney's evocative lines and their lesson. Even in the cold winter of violence and injustice, the seeds of resolution and peace and justice may be quietly taking root, ready to blossom when the time is right.